So, hi everybody, Deanna King here, and today we are diving into a topic that creates a lot of confusion when it comes to toxic relationships. And excuse my stuffy nose again, I'm still dealing with this flu. It doesn't seem to be going away. Tough one. Anyway, I have people messaging me saying that they don't know whether the person in their life is an abuser, a narcissist, or both. When you've experienced emotional chaos, manipulation, or constant invalidation, you naturally want clarity because clarity creates some kind of steadiness, and steadiness makes healing feel possible. Now, understanding the difference between an abuser and a narcissist is not as simple as people think. And so today I'm going to try to explain the difference as best that I can so that you can hopefully get clearer. So that being said, we begin. Abuse is defined through repeated behaviors that cause psychological, emotional, physical, or relational harm. And these behaviors, they build patterns over time and they create fear, they create instability or loss of autonomy. And what makes abuse so insidious is that it often begins subtly. You don't know it hit you. It starts with small violations or dismissals that seem isolated until they accumulate into a recognizable pattern. Abuse isn't defined by anger or conflict alone, but by the consistent use of fear, intimidation, belittlement, or coercion to maintain control within the relationship. It's all microaggressions. Anyone, regardless of personality, background, or emotional structure, can become an abuser when they choose dominance, control, or emotional cruelty over respect, empathy, or accountability. Abuse is therefore behavioral rather than structural, meaning that we look at what the person does rather than their psychological makeup when determining whether their actions are abusive. And this distinction, it matters because people often assume that abuse must be tied to a disorder, when in reality, abuse can emerge from insecurity, entitlement, emotional immaturity, or learned patterns that were never examined or corrected. Abuse is ultimately judged by its impact because the emotional scars that it leaves speak way louder than any justification or excuse the abuser might offer, and they will offer excuses. Abuse can come from someone who has very low self-awareness and lashes out without understanding their own internal motivations, but it can also come from someone who is extremely aware of the power they hold and uses that awareness intentionally. There's all kinds of abusers out there. Abuse can be explosive and dramatic or quiet and subtle, like chronic emotional dismissal that slowly wears down a person's sense of value. Abuse can show up in relationships that look calm on the outside while privately functioning in a way that leaves one person drained, anxious, and persistently silenced. Does that sound like you? What unites all forms of abuse, though, is that it damages the victim's ability to feel safe, stable, and emotionally grounded. And once that damage begins, it rarely resolves without significant change. Understanding this allows you to step back and to recognize that abuse exists on a spectrum, and narcissism is just one possible point on that spectrum rather than the defining feature. Narcissism originates from a deeply rooted personality structure, meaning that it's not simply a set of behaviors, but it's a system of internal psychological mechanisms. Narcissism is built around emotional fragility, an unstable sense of identity, extreme sensitivity to criticism, an intense need for admiration, and a profound fear of shame, really profound fear of shame. Narcissistic individuals often alternate between feelings of superiority and feelings of inadequacy, and this unstable emotional foundation becomes the lens through which they interpret all relational interactions. When a narcissist feels threatened, even in a minor or unintended way, that threat activates defense reactions meant to protect their self-image. These reactions, they create these huge emotional storms, the blame shifting, the gaslighting, and the cruelty victims recognize instantly. Narcissists, they don't seek control merely for dominance, but because control helps to regulate their emotional instability. When someone challenges a narcissist narrative, refuses to admire them, points out an inconsistency, or sets a boundary, the narcissist experiences this as an attack that endangers their fragile internal world. This is why that narcissists react disproportionately to small conflicts, often turning minor interactions into major confrontations. They are defending themselves not against you, but again against the emotional discomfort that accountability creates. Understanding this helps explain why narcissists often seem confused, lost, or frantic when their facade begins to crack, because the facade is not simply an image, it is their emotional survival system. The key distinction here is that while abusers harm based on behavior patterns, narcissists harm based on personality organizations. Their abuse is driven by psychological panic rather than calculated strategy, even though the impact feels just as damaging. This doesn't excuse the behavior, though, but it helps explain why narcissistic abuse feels chaotic. But they know what they're doing. Unpredictable and utterly exhausting for the victim also. You feel as though you're dealing with a two-year-old experiencing the terrible twos, but they never grow out of it. One of the biggest misconceptions that people have is believing that an abuser must automatically be a narcissist, but that isn't true. Many abusers, they show no signs of narcissistic personality disorder, and instead they act from unresolved trauma, emotional volatility, insecurity, or learned relational patterns. Some abusers grew up witnessing control and fear as the primary tools used to manage conflict, and they unconsciously repeat those patterns without understanding the damage that they create. Others lash out because they have no emotional regulation skills, and their temper becomes a tool of intimidation, as you all know, even though they can't articulate why their reactions escalate so quickly. There's also a category of abusers who is not narcissistic at all, yet the behavior is extremely violent. It's calculated and it's rooted in entitlement rather than emotional instability. This type of abuser doesn't need admiration, doesn't crumble under shame, and doesn't rely on a fragile sense of self the way that a narcissist does. Instead, they operate from a belief that they have the right to dominate, the right to punish, and the right to control their partner's world. Their cruelty, it's not driven by panic or insecurity, it's driven by disregard. This is the partner who stays out late because your feelings simply don't matter to him. The one who never includes you socially because he doesn't see you as an equal. The one who calls you degrading names in moments of conflict because dehumanizing you makes him feel superior. The one who drinks to excess, comes home in rage, and hurts you physically. Not because he's psychologically collapsing, but because he sees no reason not to. Doesn't mean the narcissist isn't treating you that way either here, so just keep listening. His violence is not emotional chaos, though. It is permission. That's the difference. Permission that he has given himself. These abusers might not manipulate reality the way narcissists do, but they manipulate power. They punish disobedience, retaliate when you assert independence, and sometimes escalate to terrifying levels when they feel that their control is slipping. This is the man who beats his pregnant wife and later seeks revenge when she leaves, not because his identity is destabilized here, but because he believes she had no right to escape. His violence is not about preserving a fragile ego. It is about enforcing dominance. His motive doesn't fluctuate with insecurity or emotional dysregulation. His motive is control, simple, consistent, and dangerous. He's going to use intimidation, fear, and punishment to maintain authority. And he's going to justify that behavior with beliefs such as misogyny, entitlement, or learned patterns of dominance. So where the narcissist abuses to manage internal disorder, this abuser harms to maintain external order. his order. These abusers, they don't operate from the emotional fragility, identity, instability, or shame-driven reactivity that you see in narcissists here. Their abuse comes from very different psychological roots. Let's take a look. The first one, entitlement as a core belief. Some abusers grew up learning that they're entitled to obedience, special treatment, and authority over their partner. And this entitlement, it's not a personality disorder, it's a belief system. And belief systems are powerful. This type of abuser doesn't ask, how does my partner feel here? Because he has internalized, often since childhood, that her feelings are irrelevant compared to his authority. Then we have number 2, misogyny and gender conditioning. Many men who behave like this were raised in environments where masculinity was defined as dominance, control, and emotional detachment. They learned women must serve, women should not have power, a wife exists to meet a man's need, and disobedience must be punished. This is not narcissism, it's patriarchal conditioning turned violent. They feel justified in their behavior because the worldview that they absorbed tells them that they have the right to treat their partner the way that they do. The third one is emotional immaturity, not fragility. These abusers are not necessarily emotionally fragile like narcissists. They don't collapse when criticized, but they're emotionally underdeveloped. They have poor impulse control, no ability to regulate anger, no conflict resolution skills, and no self-reflection or empathy training. Their emotional range stays locked at a primitive level. Violence becomes the solution because they never learned alternatives. 4, learned violence and normalization. If they grew up seeing yelling, intimidation, controlling behavior, physical punishment, or alcohol-fueled rage, then abuse becomes the default blueprint for relationships. This isn't a disordered personality, it's behavioral inheritance, and it's just as destructive though. Number 5, power addiction. Some abusers receive a psychological reward from controlling others. Power feels soothing, stabilizing, even intoxicating, and over time this creates reinforcement, escalation, entitlement to complete control, and anger when control is threatened. For these men, control becomes their primary emotional regulator. This isn't narcissistic fragility, it's dominance addiction. Number 6, lack of empathy due to avoidance, not identity. Narcissists, they have impaired empathy because of personality structure. Non-narcissistic abusers may have empathy, but they refuse to use it because empathy would restrict their behavior. It would force them to self-examine. It would mean accountability, and that would challenge their power. So they suppress empathy intentionally. This is a psychological choice, not a psychological disability. 7, revenge thinking from ownership, not injury. When this abuser seeks revenge, especially when a partner leaves, it's not because his identity is collapsing as in narcissism. It's because he believes that she disobeyed. She's embarrassed him. She took what was his, and or she broke the rules. The mindset comes from ownership, not vulnerability. He sees the partner as an extension of his authority, not as a separate human being. And then lastly, we have 8, alcohol. Alcohol doesn't create abuse. It reveals and amplifies what's already there. It lowers the psychological barriers that normally inhibit violence. A man who drinks and becomes abusive is a man who already has abusive impulses. The alcohol simply removes the filter. So in summary, the non-narcissistic abuse usually derives from entitlement, patriarchal conditioning, immaturity and poor emotional regulation, learned violence, power-seeking behavior, suppressed or selective empathy, and ownership-based thinking. And this category of abuser does not need a fragile ego to be dangerous. He needs only a belief that he's justified. Some abusers also act from situational stress or power imbalances without possessing the grandiosity or entitlement associated with narcissism. For example, a partner who becomes abusive during financial pressure or emotional overwhelm might not be narcissistic, but their behavior still inflicts harm. Emotional immaturity can also manifest as abusive behavior, such as partners who stonewall, belittle, or explode when discomfort arises, not because they see themselves as superior, but because they never learned how to handle relational tension. And these individuals, they might deeply love their partners while still causing significant emotional harm, proving that abuse can occur without narcissistic traits. So while not all abusers are narcissists, many narcissists do become abusive because their personality structure almost guarantees conflict when emotional needs are not met. Narcissists rely heavily on external validation to keep their unstable sense of self intact, and when validation is withdrawn or delayed, they feel threatened. And this internal threat, it creates panic, it creates shame, and it creates rage. And these emotions propel them into behaviors that quickly become abusive. A narcissist will react with criticism, stonewalling, emotional withdrawal, or complete emotional collapse because these strategies, they temporarily help them regain a sense of identity. Narcissistic abuse often feels extremely personal because it targets the victim's vulnerabilities and uses those vulnerabilities to restore the narcissist's emotional balance. When a narcissist feels insecure, they'll often accuse the victim of things that they themselves feel ashamed of, projecting their fears outward to avoid confronting them internally. They also rewrite history. They deny obvious facts, or they distort conversations to keep accountability because accepting accountability feels psychologically unbearable. Their reactions are rarely calculated, but they are deeply self-protective, creating an emotional environment where the victim must sacrifice stability to survive the narcissist's emotional storm. Aren't they fun? The combination of emotional fragility and defensive aggression is what creates the unpredictable cycles so many victims recognize, where moments of charm or connection quickly shift into coldness or cruelty when the narcissist's needs aren't met. And these cycles, they can feel like emotional whiplash, leaving the victim confused, destabilized, and desperate for answers. And once you understand the internal structure of narcissism, the behavior makes more sense, though the harm remains equally serious and equally unacceptable. Victims, they often confuse abusers and narcissists because the behaviors can look nearly identical when you're the one being hurt. Both abusers invalidate your emotions, they dismiss your boundaries, they twist your words, or create emotional chaos that leaves you depleted and unsure of yourself. From the outside, the relationship can appear functional, but inside you're experiencing constant tension, fear, confusion, and exhaustion. Both abusers and narcissists, who are abusers also, shift between kindness and cruelty, creating unpredictable emotional cycles that keep you guessing and hoping for stability that never arrives. This inconsistency becomes deeply addictive because it trains your nervous system to seek emotional safety from the very person creating emotional danger. Another reason that people confuse the two is because both abusers and narcissists, who are abusers, I keep saying, resist accountability with remarkable intensity. They often blame you for their reactions. They minimize the harm that they cause or reinterpret events to make themselves appear innocent or victimized. Regardless of whether the person is an abuser, a narcissist, or a both, the impact on the victim is devastating in similar ways. Many victims experience chronic anxiety that infiltrates every part of their day because their nervous system becomes trained to anticipate harm even in peaceful moments. You might find yourself walking on eggshells, adjusting your tone, suppressing your needs, or avoiding topics that might create tension, leave a comment down below if you're experiencing any of this, or just type in yes, because survival requires constant emotional vigilance. You're trying to survive. This level of hypervigilance exhausts the body and mind, leading to confusion, emotional fatigue, and a loss of self-confidence. The most painful impact, however, is the erosion of self-worth. That one is huge. When you are repeatedly belittled, dismissed, or invalidated, you begin believing that your feelings are unimportant, your instincts are flawed, and your voice does not deserve space. The psychological erosion creates a profound vulnerability that makes leaving the relationship feel incredibly difficult because your sense of self has been weakened by constant emotional pressure. Understanding the impact helps victims realize that healing is not just about leaving the person, but about rebuilding the emotional foundation that was damaged by their behavior. They crushed your foundation. The true value in distinguishing between an abuser and a narcissist is not about diagnosing the other person, but about understanding your emotional reality with clarity and compassion. You do not need a label to validate your pain because the emotional experience itself already tells the truth. You don't need to prove whether the person is narcissistic or simply abusive because both possibilities justify your need for boundaries, distance, or complete separation. What matters most is acknowledging how the relationship made you feel and recognizing whether your emotional safety was consistently threatened. Healing begins when you stop analyzing the other person and start honoring your own experience because your feelings hold more truth than any psychological label ever could. You deserve relationships where you feel respected, valued, heard, and emotional safe, and no diagnostic explanation should ever be required for you to choose those things. Your story matters, your pain matters, and your perception deserves to be trusted. My hope is that this extended explanation gives you the clarity and validation that you need as you continue your healing journey, because your healing is not only possible, it is absolutely deserved. So thank you for watching, and we shall see you in the next video. Bye for now.